If you're inspired by today's episode and want to get more involved in building equitable spaces for women of color in tech, business, and leadership, visit us at latinasb2b.com. Welcome to Latinas from the Block to the Boardroom, where wisdom comes from everywhere. This is a podcast about generational wisdom shared to help build a bridge for future generations and to build stronger communities through education, technology, and health. Welcome to Latinas from the Block to the Boardroom. Hola, hola, and welcome back to Latinas from the Block to the Boardroom. This is our season 7. We are kicking off, and we are excited that you continue to support us through all of the social media platforms and also through Apple, Spotify, and as well as YouTube. So thank you for sharing our information and continuing to elevate our voices. I'm your host, Teresa E. Gonzalez. And today's episode that we're kicking off season 7 is nothing short of powerful. So what do you think when you hear freedom of speech? Where does it come from? And why do we have the right to publish and say what we do online and in these public spaces? Today, I am joined by Nora Benavidez, a Latina civil rights attorney and fierce advocate for democracy, digital rights, and free expression. Nora is the senior counsel at Free Press and a nationally recognized expert on tech accountability, media policy, and First Amendment law. She's been on panels from South by Southwest to UCLA's Policy Center and Latina Futures and has publicly spoken her mind about the backslide of false promises from big tech and AI to understanding Section 230 and how it all impacts our communities. So buckle up. This conversation is raw, necessary, and deeply urgent. Gracias. I'm so privileged and excited to have my very special guests. They're all very special, but this is going to be epic, guys. And I just want to tell you that Nora Benavidez, if you do not know her, everybody needs to get on board about what she does, her information, and what she is doing to help save democracy, especially for not just America, but especially talking about our comunidad. Nora is a Latina attorney taking on big tech, and we're going to have information in the show notes about her report about Big Tech Backslide, where she has gathered so much information of fact checking and resources that is going to be very helpful to this conversation today. Her evolution from Pan America versus Trump victory to current free press leadership. Her website with her organization is freepress.net. She has been recognized as a Brookings Institute AI Liberator. And what's most important is why her work is more important than ever because of how we both have a similar outlook on how social media is extremely manipulative towards our community and also the regulations that are still not in place since the Biden administration and how we need to all dial in into what that means for our future generations. So welcome, Nora, to Latinas from the Block to the Boardroom.
It's so good to be here. I'm so excited. I'm nervous. You said we're going to be unscripted, so here we go.
Yeah, no, totally unscripted. So everybody, the backstory with Nora is I saw her at South by Southwest, but also I had read about you in some of your postings on LinkedIn. And then just recently, you were at the Hispanics in Philanthropy on another panel with the UCLA Chicano policy and with Sonia Diaz moderating with some other chingonas about media and how it's affecting our comunidades and what we need to do from a leadership perspective and how all-encompassing communications and social media is today. So, Nora, thank you for joining us today. I want to get your perspective again on why you came into this. I want to say it's a fight, and it is. It's, la lucha forever, but, we've all been doing it. But this is on another level of technology, which is why I admire you so much. And you're a lawyer. So let's get into it. I want to talk about your background as a lawyer how you came into it as a Latina. So let's get into it. Let's talk about it. Break it down.
Well, I always want to talk with Latinas about being a lawyer and doing civil rights work and why tech is so dangerous now. I'll be honest, no one looked like me when I was in law school, and no one looked like me that wanted to do civil rights and democracy defense work. So I always invite young women in. I always want there to be a bench for us as Latinas who work in public service. And I feel so strongly that we have to really build up our community. And I'm thrilled to be here. I mean, it's a really great initiative that you're doing. I love From the Block to the Boardroom. I love the name. And, it's funny. I mean, I'm from LA. I'm from Los Angeles, like born and raised. And then I moved to New York and lived there, went to undergraduate at NYU. I created my own major way back. This is decades ago. It was really centered on how power and information are linked. And it's funny, I now am a lawyer. I mean, so much has evolved, but that's really where my heart always is the way that power and our platform, are linked. And when I became a lawyer, I was living in the South. I went to Emory Law. I got a tremendous job offer to work at the ACLU and really dove into the Southern civil rights community. I think there's one story that's worth telling in like, how did this tech issue really catapult me into a new space? I remember during the first Trump administration in early 2017, I was already a litigator. I was already working with protesters of all sorts, organizers of huge movements like the Black Lives Matter folks, the Parkland shooting kids after, their school was shot up. I worked a lot with people like John Lewis. It was really tremendous from an opportunity perspective. And I started getting calls in the community in Atlanta where immigrant friends and community groups were worried about what they didn't know were lies yet, but they heard that ICE was coming to schools to pick up parents who were there to pick up their kids. We didn't have words like disinfo. We didn't use disinformation or misinformation. We didn't talk about like info ops or any of that. But I was there in the community driving to these schools to figure out, was it real? Was whatever this conspiracy or rumor that people heard in their WhatsApp groups, were those credible? And a lot of times they weren't. A lot of times we found out that there were lies spun up on social media or on our apps to make communities afraid. And I felt at the time that litigation alone couldn't solve what we were up against and what I thought we would increasingly have to confront, which is an entire hateful apparatus of individuals and viewpoints that want to oppress people that look like you and me, people who want progress. And so I spent then the next decade almost really pivoting my career, continuing to do civil rights work, but really thinking about how are the systems, how are our media and tech systems playing a role and really manipulating all of us. And so that's where I now have melded this really amazing career of having been a litigator, having done civil rights work, worked with people on the ground, activists, journalists, and really kind of married that with what is now, I think, the call and the challenge for all of us, which is how do we advance a new framework where people are more important than profit or property?
Right. I mean, I am so on board with that. I just had in my previous episode, Julie Scalfo, who was previous journalist in New York Times, and how she was reporting on all of this affecting the youth, right, on social media. Now, a lot of folks that are listening, there was a big time before any technology, and we are both from that, but also being a part of this new hellscape that's happening. And don't get me wrong, I love all of technology. I would not be talking about this if I didn't love technology so much and I wanted to be better for us. So, thank you for a lot of that information. I want to talk about your report, The Big Tech Backslide, which will be available in the show notes after here. So please, everybody, make sure you get a copy of this. Nora is going to be updating this, but this is a very thorough report on technology that she started. And Nora, do you want to give us a little, just a background about why you started that and then what's in it? That's very important to our community.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't rocket science. Like, that's the thing. It started out, I was observing this period of time in 2020, 2021. A lot of these tech whistleblowers came forward with evidence really damning social media platforms.
Yep.
Showcasing that executives like Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, and others understand the role that their platforms play in shaping and manipulating public opinion, and that the platforms had tools to make our exchange and expression safer and more equitable. When those whistleblowers came forward, like Frances Haugen, for example, there was such a push towards what we call tech accountability. Congress suddenly was fired up. Biden was fired up. Everyone was talking about the effect that tech has on democracy and how harmful it can be. And I'll have you know, there have been dozens of hearings on tech issues and what kind of tech policy we need in this country. And we have not passed a single bill on this issue. And I know we're going to get into some of the kind of, structural policy issues. So just keep that in the back of your mind. But despite this push, right, despite all this attention and outrage that platforms weren't doing well enough, I started then observing what I kind of called a backslide. I was like, wait, what's happening? There's pressure on these platforms, and yet what they're doing is actually walking away from the things that they previously promised. And so I wrote a report actually called Empty Promises before Big Tech Backslide. Empty Promises examined in 2022 all of the policies that companies like Facebook, now Meta, Twitter, now X, YouTube, and TikTok, the kinds of policies that they put in writing, but then didn't apply in practice.
Right.
And I observed more and more and more that our tech accountability field was really losing the game. And in fact, these platforms have done a few different things. They've not just stopped applying their policies, they've abandoned their policies. They've abandoned content moderation policies. They've abandoned and laid off entire teams like trust and safety teams, all the while giving extra visibility to VIP actors, people like Donald Trump and his accounts. And so Big Tech Backslide, I wrote in 2023, and it was really the kind of culmination of a lot of years of research, examining how tech platforms have walked away from the commitments that they should make to users and the effect that this has on democracy. So it was a lot. I went kind of crazy when I was writing it. I was like deep in it, and it was a blast, but it was a beast of a project to do.
Yeah, no, I'm very appreciative of it. And I think that once we know the levels that you went to, because everything is cited in that report for fact checking, that people will begin to understand that they can pull pieces to understand, like I did, like, why is this happening? Or what about this that I heard back in, 2016? Or what happened in 2018? So, folks, this is not the first rodeo of the Trump administration that we know about, okay? It was in 2016 and tech was starting to shift. That's when I started to notice, why are these platforms actually giving a lot of time to these organizations to spew all this misinformation and hate crime? But also, this was before AI was coming out. And what I did know from working there at both Facebook and Google is these platforms, you think it's free, but it's not. They are totally governed. I wouldn't say governed, but they are fueled by ads from big brands, ads from political, organizations. They take all the money because of where the eyeballs and the clicks go. And we might know this and we may not know this, but it is a fact. That is how they got started way back before, when the internet started, when Google started. And then how is Facebook going to get monetized? Mark Zuckerberg even said it in front of Congress by ads, when the congressional folks were like, well, how are you making money? And he said ads, and he laughed in their face because he knew they did not understand the whole monetary business model behind that and driving what we see today. So it is completely off the rails. And I want to talk about Section 230 a little bit, Nora, that I think you might know some information about, because that is the absolute loophole, in my opinion, that they are using to skirt around and to keep getting away with all this information, disinformation, everybody pointing the finger at everybody else. But I'm not going to give it away. You talk about it. And this is something I've known for a little while, but you have all the deets. So let's get into it.
Well, Section 230, I mean, when you talk about the law, when you talk about policy, it's not sexy sometimes. Like, that's the thing.
No.
So I'm going to try to make it interesting. And
hence the pause.
Like, I know. I was like, well, how are we going to make this fun? It's an impossible task. And believe it or not, I wrestle with the benefit that 230 brings us, actually, and the kinds of ways that Section 230 supports free expression. So I'll back up. In the 90s, there was, the rise of the internet. I mean, we're consolidating a lot of history here, but
yeah. Everybody get on board.
Here we go.
Here we go.
One of my favorite videos ever was the David Bowie interview. Have you seen this about how the internet and tech were going to affect society? And I just thought he was really spot on. He said, we can't even begin to imagine how it will change all of us. And there will be opportunity, but there will be deep problematic issues, that unfold over decades and potentially centuries. And I think we're really seeing that now in the most existential way. It's quaint, actually, to talk about things like Section 230 and Mark Zuckerberg when he started Facebook. I think about how obvious it is that a man that started a ranking system to, put women's hotness on campus would, of course, help usher in and advance a kind of hate-fueled environment that promotes people like Donald Trump or Elon Musk. So, it just feels like we're in such an advanced state now from where we were even a year or two ago to talk about why tech is failing. And I never want to throw the First Amendment under the bus because I've been a First Amendment lawyer for a long time. So let's talk about Section 230. When the internet came about and people communicated mostly on listserv or blog postings and blog websites, there was, of course, increased conversation. And people would post on each other's blogs saying, I hate you, I'm going to go kill you, or whatever, some violent thing. And there was really this immediate question for Congress. How do we make sure that people can speak freely, feel like they have access to information, and also maintain their own websites without being liable for what others were saying? So if you host a website, let's say, and I go to that blog and write something, should you be liable for what I said? That was really the question. And what our lawmakers found in the 90s was, of course, you should not be liable for what I say on a comment. Or if someone else posts and then I harass another person going to your website, you shouldn't be liable for me harassing them. That was really the premise for what Section 230 did. It created protection for someone like you to not have to be liable for what I said on your blog. That's it. Okay, well, let's fast forward now to today, even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Companies like Facebook really used Section 230 to shield themselves from liability for harmful content. And there are ways that we actually have worked to get around Section 230. One of the really interesting cases I worked on a few years ago was called Vargas v. Facebook, which identified the discriminatory ways that Facebook put users into groups based on identity, ethnicity, race. And that was their content. They created these algorithms and these little cohorts to show different groups different content. Right. And we got around Section 230 immunity. We were able to at least get to the stage where a judge said the absence of harm doesn't mean there was no harm. In fact, maybe discrimination invisible as it is, given our algorithmic world, is worthy of being examined. Let's go through and try to figure out what's really going on here. So I believe that Section 230 is actually, I'm going to surprise you, Teresa, like an essential piece of legislation and law, because I believe that absent Section 230, platforms would find other ways to evade and avoid accountability. And we have to become more clever. We have to be able to figure out ways to protect free expression while also protecting users and safety. So it's a really difficult discussion. It's one that we've worked a lot at Free Press on. I've written briefs for the Supreme Court on the issue of Section 230 and that we need to retain much of the sort of core, essential elements of that law. But we also need much more robust forms of transparency and accountability for these platforms.
100%. I couldn't agree more. It is very complex. And it did start in the 90s, and it was due to telecoms, right? Telecommunications and the internet. So it's got a big history. And I almost feel like, in a way, how the Constitution was written, it's like we need amendments to that now to support what's happening today. And I want to talk about that post that you did on LinkedIn. You're doing some excellent work on just breaking down like very simple, understanding of the First Amendment and speech. And it is related to this. And you were talking about what is the difference between the First Amendment and hate speech, because that is also considered the First Amendment.
Well, let me start actually with, I just want to name some of the red flags that I think we're really watching play out right now as Trump and Musk and others consolidate power. Those red flags all point us back to why the First Amendment matters. And so that's why I think it's worth sharing and talking about it. I love the First Amendment. I really do. I mean, my heart always sits with protest, with the deep need for the people of all sorts to speak truth to power. This country was imperfect when it was founded. I mean, it let's name that, obviously. It's not a surprise. Right. It's not a secret. You and I would never have been protected in the Constitution the way it was created. It has, this country, the United States, was founded on disgusting practices to obliterate Native Americans, people who had this land, women, Black people, slaves at the time, you name it, categories that were not included. At the same time, it was a document, the Constitution and our Bill of Rights were like living things to evolve and to change and to meet moments that presented themselves. And that's why I love the Constitution and I love our Bill of Rights. So I get really corny actually when I talk about it because I think...
No, I love it. I love it a lot. Go for it.
Okay, good. I'm like, I really, it's so... I think that somehow free speech has been a term and a concept that white people, and particularly white men, have claimed as theirs. And what I'm on a mission to do is help us all reclaim free speech because it is essential for everyone, particularly people who are marginalized. So what has Donald Trump done, let's say, in just the last few months? He has tried to subvert reality. He's tried to say, this is the narrative. This is what is happening. It is the only narrative that fits in a narrow box. So that means that dissenting views are criminalized, attacked, delegitimized. That, to me, is the very first step in an authoritarian takeover. And it affects our free speech. It affects our ability to know ourselves. It affects our sense of confidence in what we actually know to be true. Many people over time, when they hear lies repeated and the twisting and contorting of facts, to fit what Trump wants, many people end up believing these false narratives. And our exposure to lies repeatedly makes it harder and harder for us to understand or identify what's real. And we lose a sense of community. We lose a sense of who we are. So I think that we have to understand is the first step. And it's done on purpose. It's done to confuse and to distract people. And when we're distracted, we're less likely to then organize with each other. We're less likely to protest. We're less likely to do all these things. And as you say, the kind of hateful rhetoric that we now see can take over. And I think there's really this window where when we're distracted or when we're overwhelmed, we're all overwhelmed, right? When we're sort of paralyzed in a way, when that happens, people like Trump take more power. And they continue pushing these narratives that immigrants are eating dogs and cats, that they are, all gang members or criminals or welfare queens, all the various lies that he's promoted, that immigrants don't pay taxes, you name it, to the point where now it isn't even considered troubling in his own party when Trump says people who have debts can work those off by working for other people, which is basically a call for slavery again. Let's be real. And that environment makes me all the more committed to protecting free speech, protecting people who are reporting on what's happening. And I think we have to take up the notion that free speech is ours, because otherwise the far right will claim it. And while they claim free speech as theirs, they will also then claim they are being censored. So it's a double standard. It's like they've been victimized, and yet they're the only ones that have free speech rights. And so what I'm really thinking about is this kind of free speech for me, but not for you mentality that has taken over. And that is very dangerous.
Right. And just to circle back on what you just said on the narrative of immigrants and how it gets repurposed every few decades. It's just a repurposing of the narrative that we are the scary people because we have power. That's just the bottom line. We know the land, we know our communities, and to fight the narrative, they have to instill fear. So this is like something that has been going on for decades and centuries.
Yes. And so, Teresa, way back in the 1400s when the printing press was created, in the UK, right? Like different country. Yep. I mean, this is not a new fight. People started writing about the need for the people to govern themselves, and that the crown, the king, should be accountable to the people. And do you know the first author who wrote something about this hadn't even published his book yet? Crown officials entered his home, arrested him, and killed him. And his book hadn't even been published. That story, his name was John Twynne. He was alive in the 1400s writing about people power. That's what he was writing about. Like, the people should have a voice. And the United States and our First Amendment were really created to fight what happened in the UK, to fight the likely possibility for those in power to silence and delegitimize others. Right. We've seen it with Benjamin Franklin claiming that minority groups were somehow criminal. We've seen it with every single minority group throughout history being othered and dehumanized and really cast as criminal or dangerous. And that's what loitering laws did. It's like basically to criminalize Black people standing around. The premise of being who you are is problematic, is really what they've tried to tell us over centuries and centuries. So I fully agree. And I just want to put like a finer point on it that this is centuries in the making.
Oh, yeah, no, 100%. And so this is why, Comunidad, if you're listening, it's like, okay, we're going to get into the organizing and what's happening next for us to really not be afraid anymore. And I know there's a lot of social media posts and everything. This is all by design, by the way, for all these companies to make money. So, I mean, Nora, there's so much we could talk about. We might even have to do this as a 2-part series, but I want to get into our Comunidad. We're talking about this narrative, how it's now with the big, stupid bill that got passed, how ICE is going to be fueled now even more. I don't think people understand the scale that the revenue towards ICE now is going to be bigger than the FBI and all these other organizations that get budgets under the government. There is a reason why this is happening. There's a reason why we're talking about this shit today, because we all need to get on board about what's really happening and how we can organize, and we're going to get to that. But I want to talk about the misinformation machine and the Latino community and why we're being targeted. I think this is coming off the back of what we just said.
This is the moment. Like, this is the set of issues. You know, the LA protests that started almost a month ago, I think were really emblematic of, I'm excited about, you know, public consciousness and people waking up to say, I don't want to be on the wrong side of history. And it all ties to the current premise that our society operates with, which is property and money and profit are everything. And I think what we're seeing is very slowly Americans and others saying, wait, profit at the expense of what? And when profit comes at the expense of humanity, collective humanity and solidarity, is it worth it? You know, the moment I really think a lot about was when all of those Waymo cars were burning, you know, protesters set them on fire. And the media in Los Angeles and then around Los Angeles said, this is terrible. The Waymo cars are being burned and property damage is terrible. Like, let's be clear. That's awful.
Yeah.
However, when people are getting picked up, many of whom are documented, some of whom are not, some are citizens, when these individuals get picked up by ICE and people wearing masks or in plain clothes, and these individuals are essentially disappeared into an immigration system, there is profound outrage and fear. And the dehumanization of these people, they're being basically political prisoners in the United States, should be far more troubling than 2 Waymo cars being burned in one city. We can hold many things as true, right? Yes, it's awful when someone throws a brick at a Target window. That's terrible, right? But that costs how much to fix when we are then stacking that next to and somehow saying that it's more troubling for a car to be burned than for hundreds of people to be picked up, their children left unattended, and them with no access to due process or their own constitutional rights, just shipped off to wherever. And so my question for all of us now is, where do we want to stand? Where do we want to stand on these issues? And I think we have to stand very firmly by saying, sure, profit is wonderful. Don't get me wrong. I want my villa in the south of France. I'm there for it. I love money. I want money. This isn't like I don't want money.
Right.
But what is the expense that we are bringing with us? And are we living in a reality in which opportunity is equal for all of us? I don't think we are. We have people like Elon Musk purchasing his role in the White House. We have people like Jeff Bezos purchasing a seat at the inauguration in front of Trump's cabinet. This is like the most troubling blurring of corporate and official government lines I have ever seen in my life. And it's all premised on hoarding power and hoarding profit.
Yeah.
So we have to be fighting that. We have to name it. We have to fight it. We have to see it. We have to call it out.
Yeah. No, 100. I mean, that's what the whole thing of the platforms, again, is to run on funding of ads, right? And it's brands. And, you know, it's so much data. So I want to get into the data aspect of that and how, if you don't know, the Trump administration just initiated 4 new Army lieutenants that all came from tech. And they're all from AI platforms, especially Planeteer, which is a huge data pool of all of our information for military use. And so this is not an unknown thing. This is a fact. You can look it up. And this is the least thing that is being talked about regarding AI. And we're talking about why is it? And the whole thing about AI, why there's no regulation, is because they say we want to be the forefront of AI in this new era of technology, which is why they're all together. But Nora, I want to bring up this ethical issue with you to think about this and everybody listening to this right now, because when Japan, we put the Japanese in concentration camps here. When the SS, which are the Nazis in Germany back in the time, these were both going on simultaneously, by the way, Japan and the Nazis, right? At the same time in the 1940s. And when they started, putting a lot of the Jews in these concentration camps, which is the exact similar thing happening in two different areas. And what did they do? They put scientists in charge of creating an atomic bomb, which is almost like equivalent to what is happening today in putting these folks in charge of these AI systems. It's like, do they knowingly know what's going to happen? No, maybe they don't. They're just building something that says we're going to be competitive in the world to keep us safe. But at the end of the day, if you haven't seen Oppenheimer, the movie, the guy was really upset about what he did. And the military guy was like, you don't have to push the button. So it's kind of off your moral plate. So I want to talk a little bit about that if you want to. I know it's a heavy thing. If we can get into that about AI and why it's not being regulated. I feel like it needs to be regulated. Biden started it way too late, and now it's completely off the table. There's no resource for information that was started by the Biden information. It was taken off the government website. So, I mean, people, we have to dial in. I know it's scary, but just buckle up for a minute and listen to your Theas here and listen to us talk about this. Who else are you going to get this information from that are Latinas that are talking about this, that are super dialed in? Okay, I'm done.
I mean, it's insane, Teresa, how much information private companies have about us and how government is paying for that information. And it all relates to this larger surveillance and AI machinery that's pervasive around the entire world. You go to, let's say, the grocery store, you want to pick up whatever it is, for dinner. There are at least 80 photographs taken of you at any time, 80 plus. The amount of information that we ourselves give up just for a slightly more precise Uber pickup location, when we give people on platforms access to all of our sensitive information when we're purchasing things on Facebook Marketplace, there are untold amounts of data about each of us now because of the online world. And that information is then being filtered into AI tools that are being trained on our thoughts, our ideas, our Google Docs. It is so, we could do an entire session, you and I, just walking people through the enormous surveillance apparatus and how various tools and companies like Palantir are operating with zero regulation or oversight and very little knowledge by the public about the real harmful implications. It is a truly apocalyptic type of conversation. And I'm really glad you kind of bring up the AI piece with the question about ICE, because these are really going to become more and more and more related.
Exactly.
The big, beautiful bill that passed last week includes provisions to bolster funding for ICE, which will make ICE's budget bigger than any single federal agency like the FBI, the Drug Enforcement Agency, our Bureau of Prisons. ICE will have a budget now bigger than each of those and bigger than all of those combined. I'm worried because I'm, at the end of the day, like, I care about people. I care about like people's dignity. And all of this points us towards one outcome, which is the obliteration of our basic rights and the demonization of immigrants in particular. It will be premised on monitoring people's faces on, through various tools. It will be premised on monitoring all of our devices and our location. And it's really next level. It is so far beyond what most of us kind of think about, day in, day out. Right. And it's really scary.
Thank you for that, Nora. What I want to circle back to, and I do want us to have that discussion, maybe we open it up on a live this is very scary times. And I want to start moving into solutions with people about how we can, combat this. It does bring a chill up people's spines to understand. Like everybody thinks, oh, I can have total privacy. No, you carry this phone around. You're just a chip all over the place. You have to go completely off the grid. And, that's part of it. It's like, how do we stay positive, or how do we organize moving forward because of ICE? That's what I really want to get into. Fact checking is one. Again, your report will be in our show notes for people to really look up the information that we're talking about in policy rollbacks from these organizations when Donald Trump before he came into office. This is a quid pro quo, in my opinion, of how this all came to be. Everybody was promised something before he got into office, which is why they're all bending the knee. So we have to fight back. And let me just say this real quick. There are 99% of us, and there's only 1% of them. We give them all of our money. That is a big deal. And how we choose to spend our dollars moving forward and what we choose to interact on here and how we want to come to grassroots organizations is really going to be key. So I'm teeing that up for you. I think you were going to talk about that anyway, but Nora, I'm going to give you the floor on this to just give us what we can do. I mean, we all can't be lawyers that are fighting, but I mean, what can we do as, part of our civic duty? I know voting is one. One of them is voting.
I'm so glad you mentioned, we can't all be lawyers, because I think there's this premise when people come up to me sometimes, they're like, I know I can't do anything. I can't be litigating like you are or whatever it is. And I think to myself, and I tell people all the time, know your sphere of influence. You are not powerless.
Right.
I do not have the kind of influence that others have in certain circles. There are people in mom groups that have so much influence to help correct anti-trans or misogynistic language.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to own our power. Yeah. And not everyone's going to be a journalist that can do, a massive investigative piece that sheds light on what's happening. I can't do that. That's a journalist's role. So know your sphere of influence. The other thing that I've been telling people is, we can't wait to feel excited or moved by the moment, because this is a really horrible time.
Right.
Anyone who is aware of anything, if you're reading the news at any pace of regularity, it is bad. And it gets worse. And from our natural disasters to shootings and political violence to legislative gutting of civil rights and decades of progress, I mean, it's bad to worse. So we can't sit around and wait for the moment where we suddenly are excited to take action. We have to assume that we take action, and then as we build solidarity and as we build action, we get more excited. And so I always tell people, you got to flip the script. You can't wait. You got to take action now. So my advice to people is plug into what matters to you. We're all not going to become specialists in gender issues and reproductive issues and surveillance or First Amendment or, DEI. There's so many assaults facing us. So plug into what matters to you and then really put energy into that. Get excited about it, because it's going to take so many of us. It's going to take decades to correct where we're going right now.
Yeah.
And so I think my final piece of advice, first, know your sphere of influence. 2, take action before hope, because we cannot wait to become hopeful. And then 3, know that this is a long-term fight. So take care of yourselves, go to the doctor, make sure you're safe and fed and loved and cared for. Build community. We have to really protect each other in an environment that disincentivizes community and care. And so we've got to reject the environment around us that tells us we are powerless, we are just cogs, that the phone is everything. I often say, unplug, go meet someone in person.
Oh, 100%. Thank you for saying that, because the more we start to look up and look people in the eyes and see what's real and be in community, And the other thing is, I want to close here with you, is how we fund local organizations and small businesses. We were talking earlier about what is really pushing the narrative, and it is big corporations. If we go back to local industries, local community organizations, restaurants, we start promoting media like this, putting in a couple bucks here and there, that helps everybody to build our coalition to help stem off some of this. And we're not saying be Luddites to get off technology or to not be disengaged. We're talking about how do we make it better in communities and how we can really talk with one another about real big resources that we need to pull in these, years ahead. Primaries are coming up. Everybody get involved. I'm not kidding. Be dialed into the information of your local community and people that are running that you know really well. That's it. That's a big thing. And that's not going away yet. So everybody, stay tuned for that. So Nora, thank you so much for joining me on Latinas from the Block to the Boardroom. Is there anything you'd like to close us out with today?
I'll close with one thing, which is we're not losing. Like, this is bad, but almost every case that has been brought challenging Donald Trump's unconstitutional takeover, he has lost. All of the attack now on progress would only be happening and is only happening because our voices are powerful. And so we can't let the false narrative win out that we are powerless, that overlords can and should take over.
Right.
And because we have so long a fight ahead of us, we can't lose sight of what community means to us. We can't lose sight of a shared humanity. The only way out of this is going to be together, which means that we need radical solidarity. We need radical racial and ethnic solidarity. We need radical allyship. We need to continue to find the ways that we are more alike than different. And that is the call for, I think, this century, is how do we build up a collective humanity and dignity?
I love that so much. I could cry. Thank you so much, Nora, for joining me today. And again, I know it's such a time, and I really would like to invite you back to have a panel, live stream. I will get in touch with you about that. Everybody, please follow us on all the social media channels. Nora can be reached at her own website at Nora Benavidez. That's BENAVIDES.com. She also, her organization is freepress.net, where you can get information, loads of information that fact checks. They are dialed into all the policies and governments and all the civil suits that are happening. So please stay tuned for more. And thank you for joining me today again, Nora. The door is always open and this platform is yours. So let's go. And thank you for joining me today on Latinas from the Block to the Boardroom. Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nora, for joining us and sharing such vital insight on tech policy and how to protect our civil liberties. You can find Nora's work at freepress.net and also NoraBenavidez.com. That's NoraBenavidez.com. And follow her thought leadership on LinkedIn. If you're ready to step into your power and to be a part of this growing community of change makers, visit latinasb2b.com to access resources and connect with us further. I'm your host, Teresa Gonzalez, and thank you for tuning in to Latinas from the Block to the Boardroom. This episode was produced by Teresa E. Gonzalez of 5E Leadership and Marketing and latinasb2b.com and co-produced by Robert Lopez of cratesaudio.com. Hasta la próxima. Stay loud, stay proud, and stay organized. Gracias.